Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, we got a real treat for you today. We are moving from debate to deployment. We're going to be talking about a compliance officer's AI action plan. So a lot of us are kind of standing in this world between, the genie's kind of out of the bottle. How do we leverage it in a safe way? And Haley Tedeschi is here today to help us navigate through that. She stood up compliance programs across 5 different continents, and she is an absolute expert, and I think you're going to absolutely love her. So let's give her a massive emoji exposure as we get going. How's it going, Haley?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So excited to get you on here. We like to talk about things at a kind of a high level in some episodes, and in other episodes we get very tactical in getting practitioners, perspective. Firsthand is phenomenal. So I'm going to run through a couple of quick announcements. If you're here for credits, this is the place to be. Free credits every single week, whether it's for SHRM, CCB, or HRCI. Stay active in the chat today. We had asked for AI use cases, and a lot of you responded. But a lot of you are probably wrestling with this topic that we're talking about today. So share your wisdom, share your perspective in the chat, and increase your odds of winning one of the books. We're going to be giving away Reed Blacken's book, The Ethical Nightmare Challenge: How to Avoid the Worst of AI. I can't say enough good things about this book. I've learned a lot from it. We've implemented some of the things within our own organization. So you can pick that up on Amazon, or you can just get real clever in the chat and win yourself one. I wanted to introduce you to Ethel, our AI assistant. So if you are an Ethico client and you have not checked out Ethel, you absolutely should. It's live in the platform right now. But this thing is phenomenal. I think it's freaking awesome. It saves a ton of time pulling together all these different threads that are attached to a particular investigation. It can give you case summaries, investigation summaries, and executive summaries in a single click, all time-stamped. So you don't have to waste time kind of pulling that information together. You can listen, we're coming into a new era. We have the opportunity to take one of 2 paths. One path is going to be kind of the status quo path, doing things as they've always been done, putting one foot in front of the other, staying on that hamster wheel. The other path is one where we can show up with a different mindset and really, add a different level of value to our organization, become that trusted advisor. But that is going to take a shift in mindset, and B, a different sort of mix of how our time is spent. We have a very unique skill set in this industry, and our organizations need us. So when we can cut out some of this manual work that crowds out the application of this unique skill set, we can do a lot and really elevate our impact in our organization. So if you're interested in seeing Ethel, reach out to your client success manager to get some help with it. And if you are interested in exploring what else is out there, remember, it's incumbent on you to see what else is out there to make sure that you're having the impact that your organization relies on you for. Ethicsverse Day, I'm going to keep talking about it because it was a record-breaking, Guinness showed up here the other day, record-breaking event for our industry. Almost 5,000 people showed up for it. We put out a ton of resources for it. 5 new resources have been added to the to the toolkit. So if you have not spent any time, if you don't want to listen to me ramble through these, announcements, go over to the page that has all those resources. Those are all free, and use any of those to improve your program today. Like I said, 5 new ones pulled. 5 new ones have been created and added to the toolbox. And so check it out and give us some feedback on it. SCCE's conference is coming up in September. So I hope to see you there. We, of course, are going to have a booth, and we're going to have some fun stuff going on. But we also have a cocktail party on Monday night. So circle your calendars, September 28th from 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. in the Butler Ballroom down in Orlando. Come to our party. It's going to be a lot of fun. And if you are, feeling FOMO right now because your stingy CFO won't brush a couple of shekels off the table to send you down to a conference that's going to allow you to grow and get better, well, we got your back. So your ticket to CEI is on us. We have a form on the page that you'll see in the chat. Joa, I think, is going to drop that in the chat if it's not on the console right now. Fill out that form for a drawing. We're going to be selecting one person to have a full pass to the conference, hotel, flight, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. So definitely spread the word about that. If you're one of the lucky compliance officers whose organization is paying for it, count yourself lucky and spread the word, because there are a lot of people in our industry that are not able to go to these events that I think I learned so much at them, that, these events are so energizing and so forth. So check out a quick way to win a VIP pass because we love you. Okay, with that, we're going to pass it on over. Let's get one more welcome for Haley. How's it going, Haley? See, everybody's so excited. You hear that round of applause?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds great.
So I want to start kind of talking a little bit about, AI and compliance has sort of moved from this promise to practice. A couple of years ago, we were talking about, one day everybody's going to be using AI and blah, blah, blah. And I think those of us listening, the audience here is probably on sort of various different sides of the spectrum of AI use. But within organizations, I think there has been a real kind of windfall of AI usage. And so how would you frame where we actually are today versus the hype we've been hearing? The hype in the marketplace kind of takes care of itself, but where are we at kind of on the spectrum of hype versus reality?
Great question. I think from my perspective, I think the hype is here. The hype is now. It's actually coming into fruition. There's been a lot of talk over the last several years. I think there were really good efforts, even 3 years ago, to begin integrating AI, particularly from a monitoring and analytics perspective. And the results, I think, were really frustrating a lot of the time. Lots of false positives, creating more noise. I've seen a massive reduction in the noise and massive delivery in terms of quality of insights on a scale that humans are just not capable of. So whether you're talking about AI from a productivity perspective or from a risk management and analytics perspective, it's here. The question now is it accessible? And are we able to take advantage of it? And is the organization ready for that?
And then when you think about our industry, do you think my assessment is right that some people are still kind of tied to sort of the, first inning of AI where everybody was like, I don't want to lose my life, I'm still hearing people talk about, this lawyer who lost their license because they put the brief in that had all these like fake cases in it, and everybody like doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, which you've kind of described as not sort of a linear progression in the quality, but almost like a parabolic improvement. Do you feel like, there's still some folks that are still kind of stuck in that first inning when now we're kind of in a different sort of part of the game?
Absolutely. I mean, it is, there's a psychological aspect to it, right? There's a fear of AI being able to do certain things better than humans can. I think the reality is AI isn't going to put people out of the job, but the job is going to change. And if you're committed to continuing to do our work in the same way that, we have been, then it's going to impact you in the same way that people who insisted on staying, at a paper-based system and didn't adopt internet and email back in the day, it had impacts on their career prospects, right? So these are just additional tools in the arsenal, and it's you got to get on board. You got to get on board, or you will get left behind. But it's a skill. It's not a job replacement.
I love how you frame that, because that's kind of a critical reframe in my mind. There's a lot of aversion to it because of the risk. There's a lot of aversion to it. Is this going to make me obsolete? But the way you framed it there is like, there's just a new skill set that we need to build to utilize this new tool that is not necessarily going to replace us. But I think you hit the nail on the head. The job itself is going to change, and we have to keep up with that rate of change. Are there any particular tasks that you're handling now with AI that you would refuse to take back manually? Like, are there certain, to what extent have you adopted this new technology that now you're like, I could never go back to, trying to hammer a nail in with my, with my shoe. I now have a hammer. Like, what are some things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I am not at a place yet where I'm comfortable using agentic AI as a replacement for human in the loop, right? So any AI that I'm using for productivity improvements or for risk management reasons, I have a human in the loop at every step. And the ones that I am, that I will always at least use AI as my sparring partner, are digesting any sort of information intake as part of a compliance process. So, whether it is your conflicts of interest disclosures or your gifts, travel, and entertainment disclosures, or, sponsorship approvals, third-party due diligence, I will always want to have, sort of my AI-based assessment of all of the information that's available and get that sort of input from my sparring partner in a very structured way that allows me to make efficient use of it, right? And I think of AI as a partner, not a replacement. So we all become managers, leaders on day one of our AI counterparty, and we're responsible for every piece of output that we get from them. But that input is just not something I would work without now, unless I didn't have another choice.
So I've never heard that before, my sparring partner, but consider that stolen, because that is such a smart frame for this. A lot of us are kind of shadow boxing just in the mirror, and now we have someone to actually practice with and kind of spar with, as you said, and that a sparring partner gets you better at whatever you're training for, right? So now we have this opportunity to leverage it in that way. So I really love that a lot. So thanks for sharing that frame. Everybody is asking for you to bring the dog on. They want the dog in. Everybody loves your dog. They want to say hi to your dog. So tell your dog we said hi. Okay, very, very good. So if you look across kind of the compliance function, where is AI, do you think, like genuinely earning its place, and where should we be skeptical? Because what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get I'm on kind of a mission to move our entire industry forward and to become this sort of thought of broadly as the trusted advisor that I think some programs and some practitioners have been able to sort of carve out for themselves. And I think definitely on your page, it's time to like embrace this new technology and do it in some smart ways to like multiply ourselves and get better at the fight, so to speak. But how, what parts should we be skeptical about? I want us to kind of get better at like, feel more comfortable kind of sparring with this partner. So like, where is it kind of earning its spot? Where should we be skeptical? What kind of guardrails in our kind of interaction with the sparring partner should people keep in mind if they're a little bit kind of further on the end of that spectrum?
So the way that I think about it is the downstream impact of the output of the AI. So taking a steer from the limited but available legislation that's out there. So, the EU AI Act, I'm thinking about the human impacts on whatever I am producing, leveraging AI. And if the impact is dispositive in some way, then that's just not where I'm comfortable at this point. I know that there are plenty of organizations out there that have had the opportunity to leverage machine learning on 15, 20 years of data, so that there are some use cases for companies at very sophisticated ends of the spectrums to be disposing of low risk compliance related inquiries and assessments using agentic. But that's certainly not where I would start, right? So start with the sparring partner approach. Get your debrief on whatever file is in front of you, assess it yourself, make the decisions yourself, document the decisions yourself, leverage it in your employee engagement, right? AI is an incredible use case for genuinely being able to tailor your employee communications and engagement at scale to the audience, to the culture that they're coming from, geographically and, corporate culture wise, to the particular risks, to the ways that people learn effectively. You're going to need to target your colleagues that are on, the factory floor, different from those that are sitting behind desks. And AI has extraordinary capabilities from day one as sort of initial test cases to help deliver results and sort of increase productivity of the compliance function. As your first use cases.
I kind of hyped you up and you're kind of blowing that out of the water. So great job on that. There's a question in the chat that says, what if your sparring partner is wrong? Is that the right question? How do you think about that kind of conflict that's keeping people out of the pool?
100%. So your sparring partners in life are wrong, right? Like the friends that you rely on, the colleagues that you rely on. Sometimes it's not wrong. Sometimes it's differences of opinions. And you should assume that you'll have all of those same dynamics in any AI partner that you create. what is super important is that you hang in and continue to train it to get it right. That's where I saw a lot of companies kind of getting off the train early on in the last few years when they were getting frustrated by, the false positives or the imperfect results. AI has to learn in the same way that we do, but if you stick with it, if you keep giving it feedback, if you modify, the results that it gives you, put your modifications back in and tell it to learn from those results, you will see improvements over time. But in the same way that you would if you were overseeing anyone else's work, you always have to review the output with a skeptical eye.
Yeah, I mean, that I think is the big point. Like, the control here is you. It's your tool, right? Like, you're using that tool. You can think of it like an intern. We've heard people talk about it that way. You obviously need to review those things. You don't want to be pushing out AI slop that's going to compromise the reputation that you've worked your whole career to build, for example. And I think that critical eye is, the critical control to ensure that, like, the train doesn't go off the tracks. You know what I mean? So
Entirely.
someone skeptical would say something like, well, compliance AI today is just, search with, better manners. What do you think that person has wrong? Like, how do you know that question itself or that statement itself is, like, uninformed? Like, what does that tell you about that person and their view of this technology or this new tool that we're talking about?
I think it's natural, to some extent, and I wouldn't criticize, but what I would encourage them to do is think about a pain point in your life. Think about your professional life. Think about something that has been on your to-do list that you think would bring real value to the business that you just haven't been able to get to because of the, normal day-to-day business as usual in and out. And think about what work you are doing where you could potentially leverage AI and make just that little piece of your work easier, faster, and free up some capacity to do that strategic work. And start with just that one narrow use case, no matter how skeptical you are. Once you get that foot in the door and you get comfortable, then your mind opens up to possibilities that you haven't previously been open to. And I can say that because I've been there, right? I didn't start as, I'm all in on this. It took time to accept this is something that's going to happen. And it took time for me to learn and see the way in which this is really a invaluable tool in our tool belt, not, a threat to my long-term professional viability.
Yeah, getting a hammer is not an existential risk to the carpenter. It's a way for a carpenter to build more things or build things faster or something like that, So I want, I love that frame that you just gave here. And I'd love to see some emojis in the chat or some ones in the chat. If you would like some more people on your team, okay, there should be 1,000 of those. If there's parts of your job that you feel is like busy work that's not helping you really move the needle forward, I should see 10,000 of those. Okay. I should see this. Okay. It's skyrocketing. Okay. So those are kind of the easy places to start. If your frame is correct, which I think it is, those are the easy places to start with, kind of doing some experimentation with this sparring partner to drive more efficiency. I think when AI was first kind of coming out, there was, and you saw this in the Wall Street Journal and you saw this on, Twitter or wherever you get your news. You saw a lot of headlines where there was this expectation that AI was going to add a bunch of, profitability to organizations by way of firing people. And I think what we've seen, despite, some of the headlines, I think there's stories behind some of the headlines, where people have laid people off and kind of attributed it to AI. There have been a couple of kind of subsequent headlines that said that maybe they overcorrected. And, anyways, that's a whole kind of different conversation. In my own experience, and I think you're kind of echoing this, the AI impact is not a headcount reduction. It's being able to be more effective. Ultimately, you're able to do more with the same. A lot of those kind of important, non-urgent things that you don't have time to get to, it now frees up. That work always gets kind of crowded out on that Eisenhower matrix. You know what I mean? When we're living in that kind of reactive mode, what you described kind of allows us to create some actual leverage so we can spend more time in that kind of important non-urgent bucket where effectiveness really lives. And that can do a lot to, at least for me, like drive more, enjoyment in my job, drive more impact, and get to some of those things that I used to not really have time or budget or quote unquote headcount to get to. Yeah.
And I mean, maybe before we talk about some of those things we've always wanted to get to, but maybe haven't been able to, where AI can even accelerate those. I just want to share maybe a couple of practical pointers around how I avoid and have confidence in the results of whatever AI agent I'm using that for any of my compliance processes. So I have some standard kind of quality checks that I include in every prompt and that I require in every output that I get from AI. And that is, tell me every assumption that you made that may not be accurate so that I can validate the assumption.
Great.
Tell me if there's any aspect of your analysis that someone else might disagree with and why they might disagree with it. Give me a source or citation, if it's relevant to what's being provided. Give me a source or citation. Point me to every resource that you're using in order to derive the output that you're providing me. And so that also gives me a quick way to be able to sense check, is there some misalignment here aside from just looking at the output itself? So I would get into the habit of building, these sort of, kind of standard parameters into your prompts and into your agents. And you'll find that it helps you to cut off potential hallucinations, misunderstandings from the get-go.
What a smart set of guardrails there. It really probably allows you to kind of process through whatever outputs a lot more effectively and probably a lot faster by kind of embedding those in. This might be a stupid question, but like, are you hand typing that into every prompt? Do you keep some kind of prompt chunks in like a notepad somewhere that you kind of leverage over and over again? Like, I want to really kind of break this down into bite-sized pieces for somebody who's maybe just kind of watching everybody in the pool and being like, I don't even know if I can swim.
Yeah, 100%. So, if you're a party of one, then, I would start your AI prompt library, and it's sort of your living document where, you keep everything. There are some platforms, depending on which models are available to you, that will keep that history so you can leverage it right in the tool. But if not, at a minimum, go old school and just have, one place where all of that lives and you can cut and paste it across. I also find talking into my models can sometimes be the most, the fastest and most time efficient way to approach the build. But yes, I'll try to avoid recreating the wheel whenever possible.
Let's run through those kind of guardrails one more time. There's a couple people in the chat that were asking. You were saying like, what might people disagree with, and what arguments might they make? What are some of highlight claims that you were not able to validate? I'm screwing this up. Okay. This is just straight from my memory. Okay. And then finally, something like if there's, provide citations, run us through those one more time, please.
Yeah. So normally I start with, tell me any assumptions that you've made and the basis for the assumptions. Give me an opportunity to confirm the assumptions. Tell me all of the sources that you've used in order to create the output. Point me to the links. Give me the links to the sources if it's that type of activity. And then lastly, tell me if a reasonable person might disagree with you and why. Where might they take issue with the output that you've provided. So it also gets my sparring partner sparring with someone else, and then I'm the third person in the room, which is helpful.
Well, there's so much groupthink that can happen in a room by yourself. Maybe projecting a little bit too much, but like having someone to say, hey, having a sparring partner, as you say, to help you with your thinking and help see something from a different perspective before it sort of leaves that room and kind of gets launched into the world, I find to be extremely valuable. And something else you said, what I kind of think best when I'm walking. And so just walking and talking directly into the model, I think that's great. You can have that kind of stream of consciousness back and forth to kind of build that base. One other hack that I will share is like, you can dump a bunch in with an ultimate prompt to say like, help me turn this into a reusable prompt, or help me generate a prompt that I can feed into a new chat. And it's going to it's going to structure it a little bit better and help kind of eliminate some of that hallucination or some of that inefficiency ultimately that can come from that output. So I want to kind of pivot. Yeah, please go ahead.
The only other thing that I would say is make sure that you're crowdsourcing this internally within your teams. So, the one challenge that I see and something that I struggle with myself is everyone is sort of like running and taking advantage of opportunities and playing in the sandbox. And if we're not really deliberate about sharing and leveraging what each of us are learning, there's a lot of inefficiency there, right? And in some ways, there's risk that some of us are approaching the same issues from very different perspectives and getting different results. So if you are a member of a larger team, think about how you can centralize some of this, make these libraries, these prompt libraries available to everyone who should have them, and engage with each other about what the prompts look like. So, using the same prompts for consistent things, but getting the benefit of everyone's insight into what those prompts should look like.
Yeah, because you run the risk of like everybody having this new technology and everybody kind of like reinventing the wheel. If you can eliminate some of, that kind of collective J curve that your team is trying to get up by sharing some of that and having some of that knowledge transfer, it can really do a lot to avoid some of the, negative externalities that can spur off from, a bad sparring partner, so to speak. But I think it's critical that you understand that potential, waste, that inefficiency of everybody reinventing the wheel first. And second, carving out a little bit of time, even if it's just 15 minutes once a week, for everybody to present what they've learned in the last week and stuff like that. Like, I've just seen a lot of benefit in that, that knowledge transfer. And, I've gotten some really good inputs from other people on my teams who are developing really cool things, because part of the cool thing with this is that it's kind of this blank canvas, and there's so many different, everybody's a little bit different. Everybody has a different imagination and a different level of ingenuity and so forth. And when we can kind of do this knowledge share, we can really start to multiply out the efficiency and effectiveness gains from leveraging this tool in responsible ways.
Yes, but that collaboration within your own team is absolutely essential. And at least for me, I found if we don't systematize it, it falls by the wayside.
100%.
So my approach is I have a 15-minute one-to-one purely about, what is your AI learning, AI use case for this month. We do that first week of the month, every Wednesday with my whole team. And then once a month, we have a full team learning check-in where we just do a round robin and everyone takes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever it is, to show and demonstrate what it is that they've been working on that month from an AI perspective. And then, we swap it and we use it and we all start putting it into practice. So really formalizing that as part of your team culture can be really, really valuable learnings.
And, I'm going to get a little bit meta here, but we are all kind of purveyors of some kind of localized culture. And for me, at least, it feels like human beings, they get very bored if they're not making progress, if they're not growing, if there's not something new and novel. Human beings seem to be satiated almost solely on novelty. And this now has this technology now allows for a lot of that novelty. And I've seen across, various teams that I'm a part of, how exciting it can be and how much, how much newness can be brought to a job that for many people has felt very stale, kind of that hamster wheel, that sort of mechanical thing. And so this is both kind of very tactical in terms of great, now we're not going to have the same hallucinations across the team and we're sharing learning. That's great. But it's also very strategic for the growth that I think is necessary for people to feel in order to stay engaged in whatever job that they're in.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, I think, connected to that is, think about the things that you've wanted to do, but where you have external dependencies. So especially, I feel like in the data space, there's so much that compliance teams directly would or could be able to do if we had more of the technical expertise on the data side, or the access, or whatever it is, the skills to be able to clean the data. AI can help you to do all of that now. So it's, we're also unlocking use cases where maybe before we'd have to get onto an IT timeline, and maybe in Q3 we might get the resources or the capacity. Now we can do that and unlock that, a lot of that, if not all of it, ourselves, leveraging AI. So it's, also really an opportunity to start really thinking outside of the box, and where you can get some other efficiencies by eliminating some, dependencies that you might have previously had.
And so we're all kind of born with this kind of inherent agency. And I think over time, maybe that gets calloused over, or maybe that light gets dimmed a bit. And I think the separation in our economy over the next 10 years is really going to be not between the haves and have nots. It's going to be between those who are willing to exhibit that agency in this new economy, and those who are going to kind of hold on to the old way. I think the separation is going to be very drastic, and it's not going to be linear. And so I hope that, this conversation with Haley is encouraging to you to kind of, if you don't want to jump into the deep end of the pool, fine. You can at least kind of stand in the shallow end. You can at least kind of put your feet in and start seeing how this can drive some more, it's like found heads. There was 1,000 ones in the chat when I was talking about like who wishes they had more people on their team. And many, it's like this has been the constant refrain since I've been in this industry. Oh man, I don't have the budget. Oh man, I would love to have 2 or 3 more people. Well, like if the reality is you're not going to get those 2 or 3 more people, then it's really about how can I kind of multiply myself or multiply my team, given the constraints, the resource constraints that are in place right now, to put the ball in the net or to really kind of solve for the outcome. And I think you're giving us some great tips on that. What I want to kind of pivot into now is, how do we sort, this? I read an article recently that was really kind of talking about how there is this, this incentive for the large language model or like those frontier model, CEOs and marketing teams to really just hype this thing, right? Because they have returns they have to generate. They're trying to build their business and all that kind of stuff. And they, of course, are not going to be like underscoring, cigarette commercials. I know we don't have those anymore. They're not talking about all the risks, right? They'd rather not talk about those things. And so what I'm trying to get down to is that like that tendency exists across all companies that are selling kind of AI stuff. Okay. So, we hear that like AI catches what humans miss. It can be more efficient and it can do those kinds of things. What do you think is real today? What is mostly marketing? What do you think, what kind of a lens, like a critical lens do we need to bring to these sort of marketing types of claims that can help us sort through like what's real and what's not?
So I think 2 things. First, this needs to be a team sport, across the ethics and compliance industry. And, Nick, you and Ethico are absolutely amazing in helping to make that happen. At least when we're talking about using AI in ethics and compliance processes, go to your colleagues across the industry and connect with people and vendors, that you trust, that people in your network trust, to see how others are using it and get it from a first person perspective, rather than from, net new players or sources that you just don't necessarily have the same reason to have the same confidence in. But second, have an experimental mindset. You at least have to try, right? So data analytics and consequential data analytics. So for example, when do you hold a transaction? When do you stop a transaction? When do you approve? When do you reject? That is a very sophisticated, kind of end state for what AI can do. But get into the data and see if the AI-based data analytics are flagging new, different, or more insightful transactions, trends, et cetera, than whatever your existing platform and approach is, right? Don't decommission what you have and flip the switch and turn on the AI solution. You need to give yourself a runway where you're running those in parallel and you're comparing the outcomes and you're comparing the costs, right? AI is not cheap. So there are a lot of use cases where it is totally worth it. There are a lot of use cases where it's not. Right. So the mindset should not be like, we're going to move from doing this thing to AI and flip the switch as soon as the AI is built out and we're ready to use it. You got to compare the results and the outcome. If you're monitoring your AP data, your, procurement to pay process, whatever it is, your high risk deals, your discounts, compare your existing solution and the results that you're getting from that to the AI solution and meaningfully interrogate those results before you start, making a decision to completely move away from what you've got.
Yeah, man, there's so much in that. Like that could be a whole article. Like we can't outsource our thinking. We have to be the boss of this thing, right? Like we can't just rely on whatever comes out of it. We have to take that kind of critical eye, not just for the outputs, but in terms of like where that tool is used, right? Like, going back to my hammer is a great tool for certain things. It doesn't mean that you can build an entire house with merely a hammer, right? There's a myriad different tools and different trade-offs that you have to consider. So let's get kind of even more tactical. Like if a practitioner, somebody in the audience is evaluating a vendor who claims that their tool catches more, what do you think are some questions that they should ask as they're kind of trying to envision what this tool, like, is it going to work? How is this actually going to integrate into my process and ultimately change my program?
I'd have 2 key questions. The first is why. And the second is, what investment am I going to need to make to get those benefits? Because I think that is most often where there is a disconnect between our expectations as, the consumers of these platforms and the realities of what it takes to develop a good AI product. And there is a monumental upfront investment in terms of the human time and resources that are required to validate the outputs and to teach the model. And I think that's where the frustration lies, and people don't necessarily make enough of the investment to get those, results of like, ours is better and can do better than everyone else's. So I'd want to understand the why from the vendor's perspective, but also what exactly is required to get to that point, in particular for me and my organization.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that claim is presumably based on some kind of underlying assumption, and maybe it's data quality, or maybe it's access to various systems or something, right? Like, kind of understanding how that sausage is made a little bit can do a lot to help you evaluate whether something is, what is being considered in this output, or to kind of substantiate this claim that, the marketing department or that the salesperson is making. Man, I have so many questions. Getting great feedback in the chat. I told you, people think I talk too much, okay? And they're wrong, okay? But this is really a phenomenal session. I really love that we're getting super tactical, and, people will leave with a new kind of framework, or, a new lens to look at this through, to start really kind of elevating their impact in their organization. One other thing I wanted to say, speaking of talking too much, you talked about talking to other practitioners in other companies. I think that's a phenomenal idea, because you're going to get that sort of firsthand, person-to-person view, and, again, kind of taking advantage of your network. But what I would also encourage people to do is to talk to other people in their organization, in other departments, on how they're using it. Because, like, if you're in marketing, or you're in, I don't know, whatever all the other departments are, there are a lot of similarities in the work that we end up doing when you kind of strip away the facade of it all, or like the kind of the outer shell of it. A lot of it is reporting, and a lot of it is communication, and a lot of it is processing information to, summarize information, to pass it to another, team or something like that. So having those kinds of conversations, even within the confines or the construct of your organizational culture, is going to give you some hints of like, oh, cool, I can kind of borrow that. Oh, I hadn't really thought about that. That's a great idea that I can kind of repurpose and kind of re-implement over on my side.
100%. In the same way as you would cross-collaborate on every other aspect of your program, AI is no different. You may inadvertently find out that there is an organization out there that's generating data that is highly relevant to you, is new risk information, and where your team is the only one that can actually act on that from a risk perspective, right? So, that's where we really start to get into kind of the governance questions, and what does that framework for engagement and for validation and guardrails look like when we start talking about individual use cases as opposed to kind of organizational and enterprise enablement.
Great point. And so let's pivot a little bit into kind of this self-governance in the context of like, there's no rules right now, right? So if the regulators you'd want don't exist yet, or these regulations can't be enforced, how do you think compliance professionals should respond? I'm kind of talking about this is not like privacy, right? Privacy, there's a lot of regulations that it's like very clear what's inbounds, what's out of bounds, and so forth. Like, how do you think we navigate through this, given that it's kind of a little bit Wild West right now?
That's a great question. I mean, so there are industry frameworks, there are voluntary standards, and in the absence of real regulation, courts are looking to those as sort of, this has set the basic standards and the basic expectations. And so, at a minimum, insurers are expecting that companies are aligned to them. And so it's important to understand them. The key focus is on the impact cases, right? And where there are, in particular, personal human impacts, that the governance needs to look a little bit different. It's also really not unlike any other aspect of risk management, right? This might be new, it might be riskier, but everything is, a risk-based approach, because at the end of the day, every business out there needs to achieve its mission, whether that's a commercial mission or otherwise. So I think there's also a lot of, hand wringing around the lack of formal guardrails, but we have formal guardrails in a lot of areas of risk that ethics and compliance is responsible for, but very few of us are operating programs that are strictly to the letter of the law in every jurisdiction where we operate, right? So not too different in that respect.
It's not, yeah, I think that's a perfect answer. And it's just another thing. It's just another thing that we're going to apply our own sort of risk-based approach to. And to your point, a lot of what we do in our programs are beyond whatever is sort of articulated in some kind of a regulation. It's a function of the resources and the industry and the culture and the company we have and all those kinds of, the maturity of it, all those kinds of things. And so applying that same, that same skill set that got us here, even though it's a new technology, I think that's a very sort of enabling framework. That's a very encouraging thing that you just said. Let me ask you this, like, from your opinion, do you think organizations can be trusted to govern themselves? Or do you think we're never really going to be able to, like embrace this at its deepest level without some kind of a regulatory oversight? Because we're kind of in this interesting sort of in between time right now, right? There's a new thing. The regulations haven't caught up to it. A lot of us are feeling, we're kind of feeling some of those feelings tied to that last question I asked. So what would you say to that?
I mean, AI for me is a little bit like crypto, right? Where to some extent, regulators didn't really know where to start at first. And the insights come when you start to see incidents arise. And I think that aspect of regulatory development is inevitable, right? So, but in terms of kind of the holistic framework, I am not aware, generally speaking, of companies that have just been willy-nilly turning these capabilities on. I think some companies are proceeding much, much, much more slowly than others. Others are being driven by, business needs and business considerations to move much faster. But, it seems that overall companies are generally proceeding with caution and only after establishing thoughtful guardrails. I think where, as ethics and compliance professionals, we need to be thinking, again, beyond that sort of global enterprise framework, is what is the governance around the particular use cases that we have embedded in our policies, our processes, our internal controls, whatever it might be. And I think, I'm at a tech company now. Engineers love to build. You love to build, you love to build, you love to build. No one loves to maintain. No one loves to document, right? No one loves to make sure that if, Haley hits the lottery tomorrow and, I'm not here, that there's clarity on what has been built, why it has been built the way that it has, what the guardrails are, how it's governed, who's responsible, how it's operationalized. And, that's the first document that I would want to make sure I have if a regulator ever came knocking, right? I'm not looking for my global corporate AI policy. What regulators are going to be interested in is, what's your AI policy for this use case where It went wrong and where you're in a position where you need to defend what was done. So if you don't have that documented, if you don't have clear governance around those use cases where there could be impacts like that, that's where I would focus rather than spinning up lots of different use cases. Get one solid use case done, ensure it's fully documented end to end, and then move on as part of a roadmap and a strategy, not sort of a like whack-a-mole and everyone, just sort of go play in the sandbox.
Very smart. I think there's a lot of power in that sort of governance document, as you called it, quote unquote, at the use case level. That is probably a lot more specific, a lot more accurate, and a lot more defensible than the sort of overarching kind of lowest common denominator kind of global policy. And I think a smart way to do that is kind of with your sparring partner to say like, okay, I feel like this is kind of feeling, this use case is kind of working pretty well. Help me develop a governance document as I roll this out to the rest of the team. Because it's really all these kind of concentric circles. It's like, what's your own use? what's your team's use of it, what's your department's use, what's your organization's use, and like at some level that governance needs to kind of fractalize or kind of, you know, nest at each one of those tiers. You know what I mean? And so what do you think is, oh, please go ahead.
No, I totally agree.
Okay. You're just agreeing. Great. Okay. I like that. So what do you think some, like, I want to talk about, like, if you're rolling it out yourself or you're rolling it out with your team, like, how do we make that sort of micro governance, you know, use case level governance, like a best practice? How do we put teeth with it so that, you know, maybe teeth is the wrong word, but how do we make that sort of compulsory as a best practice that's very consistent? You know, you got to start at home, I think, but like, how do you help to, you know, frame out the need for what you're talking about at those various different tiers, you know, kind of radiating out from yourself?
So first and foremost, I would start with like your closest or most adjacent, widest organization. So if compliance is part of legal, then, you know, I'd be going to your legal ops team or the team within legal that is, you know, responsible for legal operations and legal governance, and say, you know, has anyone given thought to this, right? You know, especially in the contracting space, I know that's where there's some of the greatest excitement about leveraging legal AI tech. Compliance is undoubtedly not the only, you know, risk and legal organization that's building out these use cases. So just like with anything else that we do in ethics and compliance, don't fully go it on your own first. You know, talk to your stakeholders in these adjacent functions and understand and leverage and learn from what's out there. You know, maybe you need to provide some input to make it fully fit for purpose from your perspective. But what you don't want to be doing is taking it in a different direction from how the company is sort of looking at these, or other relevant organizations are looking at these things more broadly. But if it is blank space, if that doesn't exist, then I would turn to your AI sparring partner and I would ask, what are the things that I should be thinking about from an AI governance perspective for general use cases and for this specific use case? And at a minimum, come up with the checklist, the you know, basic framework, the template that is probably going to evolve over time. And sense check that with your peers in the industry and find out how other people are approaching that piece of it. I appreciate, it sounds like I'm also sort of spinning up a lot of paperwork, but it's really invaluable in terms of what the downstream impacts can be, and having that comfort to be able to move forward. You know, if especially if your fear is sort of hallucinations and potentially anomalous results and things along those lines. Sometimes just putting that type of documentation in place can help you see the gaps before there are actually bad results.
That's a great point. You know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and just having some of those conversations, you know, it's hard to balance, just kind of transparently. Sometimes it's hard to balance because we know these models are incentivized, so to speak. They're trained to be very convincing and very confident in their replies. And if you're not willing to push back on those things or say, explain that to me, or that doesn't really make a lot of sense, then you do run the risk of just kind of adopting something that maybe is, you know, a layer down, an actual hallucination from a framework perspective, or from a, I don't know, from an idea standpoint. But I think if you have that kind of dexterity, or you have that kind of comfortability with your sparring partner, as you say, they can do a lot to kind of accelerate you forward and open your eyes to some things that you might not be considering, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about everybody's favorite topic, which is accountability. So when an AI-driven control gets it wrong, or when an AI use case gets it wrong, like, who do you think is who is actually accountable for it? We can all say, of course, the organizations are accountable, but how do you think about it on an individual level, on a team level? What do you kind of communicate to your team, you know, to kind of lay down some of these sort of foundational principles that are going to allow us to kind of scale, you know, use?
I don't think it's any different from any other mistake or error that we make, you know, as professionals in our day-to-day work. If you've made the decision to let, you know, AI kind of lead the way and let AI be dispositive, you're accountable for it. If you've been the human in the loop and you still got the wrong results, you're accountable for it, right? It's really no different from any aspect of employee accountability. because again, AI is a tool. It is not an outcome in and of itself.
I mean, it's very simple, but it's interesting
I
that
was
this
going to
has
say
been.
it might be too simple, right? But this seems
I
to
don't
be
think it's
one
too
area
simple.
where, like, what's the debate? You know, like, what do you mean? Of course, you are accountable. You are accountable, just like you are accountable in every other decision and recommendation that you make.
Right. So you got to vet it, you know, that's
Right.
to your point. It's no different than if you had a team of interns or a team of new hires or a team of people on your team that put together your slide deck that was passed up to leadership. That's your slide deck. So, you know, we like to say around here, work slop is your slop. So if you're just passing work slop around, well, like that's your slop, even if you got it from somebody else, or even if you know, whatever, like if you're passing it off, your name is on the bottom of that piece of work, you know?
Yeah, I think it's most analogous to plagiarism, right? Like if you cut and pasted someone else's work and the work was wrong and plagiarizing is wrong, you're accountable. You should think of AI as the same way. You wouldn't cut and paste someone else's work product. This is not the place to be doing that either.
So how
Absent
do you,
really
oh,
discrete use
please.
cases that I'm not comfortable with yet.
There's what?
Absent really discrete use cases where, you know, I'm just not comfortable yet.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
get there, but I'm not yet.
How do you keep a human reviewer from becoming the scapegoat for a system they couldn't realistically catch? I mean, you just said we're generating all this documentation on the one hand, right? On the other hand, we're saying, well, like work slop is your slop. You have to process this. You have to vet it. How do we how do we handle that maybe conflict?
I think it's a really fair question. I'm gonna use sort of the like transaction monitoring context as an example for this. So put aside in the AI world, we as compliance professionals establish controls, establish processes, and then we monitor in whatever way that might be. In the most old school way, we do, you know, manual random sampling and auditing of discrete transactions to validate the effectiveness. And you know, you do find errors, right, when you do that. And whether it comes up through audit or it comes up through investigations or it comes up through your own internal monitoring and testing, every time you implement a new control, there is a cost benefit analysis that needs to be part of the remediation plan, right? Because we can control our way out of almost every risk, but also we can control the business out of being able to operate. So in the same way that you are going to have misses without AI being in the picture, you are still going to have misses with AI being in the picture. What you need to make sure is in place is that there is a sufficiently robust monitoring and validation process for the AI that you are using, so that you can comfortably say you are confident in the AI in the same way that you used to use monitoring and testing to validate that you were confident in non-AI enabled controls. And you have to be transparent and repeat, AI is not perfect. We are accepting risk by doing this and ensuring that you have buy-in and understanding at the right levels that that's the risk we're willing to accept to be able to leverage the technology and get the benefits of the technology in our program.
I mean, to your point, it's just like everything else. You need, you know, there's risk in everything. There's some kind of controls that you have to get kind of dialed in, balance that sort of cost benefit against. And I don't know, I just think it's very encouraging. It's very kind of enabling to hear your perspective on this, that this is not a different thing. It's just a new tool. And maybe we haven't swung this hammer before, but we have swung other things before. And we just have to kind of apply that same muscle memory to this new tool. And that kind of takes care of a lot of the, you know, risks that are keeping us from jumping in the pool, to use that analogy one more time.
So the one thing I would add, Nick, sorry, just because I think, you know, the risk of I told you so, right? Or the risk of significant reputational consequences or significant personal consequences are that much higher in the AI context. We really need to be thinking about that monitoring and testing piece from the design phase, right? So I think best practice for a very long time has been, when you're designing or standing up a new program, you're not just thinking about the policy and then the process and then how you're going to validate the effectiveness of the process. The design stage needs to include all of those things so that you make sure you're generating the data that you need from your process to do the monitoring and testing. That holistic design approach is even more important in the AI context. You need to know at the outset how you're going to validate and monitor and test. You need to make sure you have the resources to be able to do that before you launch. This is not like an old school COI tool, where we'll launch and we'll worry about the monitoring and testing later. It really has to be part of the conversation from the get-go.
Yeah, it has to be part of, that has to, you have to put the plumbing in, so to speak, when you're building a house. You can't do that after the fact. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is so fun. So let's talk a little bit about defensibility. We want to have defensible programs. We want to make sure, this is kind of a tangent off of something that you just said a minute or so ago. But what do you think an AI defensible or a defensible AI enabled, compliance program is going to look like from a regulator's perspective or from some kind of outside scrutiny perspective? You mentioned a couple of those things, but I want to kind of pull, I really want to focus on that question because I think that is another handle for people to get comfortable leveraging this new tool.
I think one of the greatest frustrations for regulators that, frankly, up until now haven't always been fair is an expectation that every part of the company knows what every part of the company knows when it comes to risk. And the frustration around there being siloing and a lack of visibility into, risk relevant activities, behaviors, whatever it might be. I think to the extent that companies used to have an argument about the reasonableness of certain parts of the company not having visibility into certain things, that is really gone by the wayside now with AI. It is sort of it is a democratizer from an information and data perspective. So, if you have significant third-party channel risks or your highest risk areas and your compliance team still does not have visibility into those, and you're blaming the data or the data quality or, the systems integrations, the M&A integration that is still in progress, I think that's where you're going to have and meet the most frustration from regulators. If you are not operating certain standard parts of an ethics and compliance program because of resource constraints, and you're not leveraging AI to make the best use of the resources that you do have, I think that's another area where you're going to be subject to, fair criticism and frustration by regulators. Our team, given the company's financial position, these are the resources that we have. And so these are the bare basics that, we had in place. That is really not going to pass the smell test for long.
We've talked about this on the show before, but what we're really solving for is a reasonable explanation, a reasonableness test or a good faith effort. And everybody has resource constraints. Everybody would like their budget to be more. There's no, the grass is not greener on the other side of the fence. It's also just dirt and grass. Okay. So when a regulator's coming in, I think kind of to your point, they are looking for, okay, well, given the constraints on your business and given the constraints on your situation, what steps are you taking to curtail these risks that are, foreseeable? You know what I mean? I think we have to assume that regulators are reasonable and that they've seen this concept of, scarcity, right? Resource scarcity across every industry and every business that they've looked at. And I think our defensibility can really, we can feel confident if we have a good faith effort, if we're trying to solve for that defensibility up front. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind, typically speaking, governments are the most resource constrained organizations out there, right? They know how to make, something out of not very much. And so that's what we're dealing with.
Okay. So, one other thing I wanted to say was you can create a chat or a saved prompt that is kind of an adversarial agent for the output that you're getting. And so it's a fresh look at it and say, pick this thing apart. That is another control that you can build in that is very scalable, that can do a lot to get you more comfortable with the outputs. If it's, if there's all these documents coming out, we should maybe do a course here. So I'd love to maybe pull this maybe on the next episode. But like, if we were to do a course, would you like it over several sessions, or would you like it a full day of 5 or 6 sessions to really talk about these concepts and really bring them down to earth? Put that in the chat, please, if you don't mind. And then Haley, as we wrap up here, like in a single sentence, what do you think is one thing you would resolve before deploying AI in a compliance function? Like, what's one thing you would leave folks with as we wrap up?
I would make sure that you know exactly who needs to sign off on new use cases in ethics and compliance.
Great. Who needs to sign off on use cases within ethics and compliance? I love it. Okay, man, I cannot believe this hour is already up. I had a bunch more questions, but thank you so much. Let's get a round of applause for the one and only Haley. Haley, thank you so much for sharing so much. I think, the chat kind of speaks for itself. This was absolutely phenomenal. So 1,000 bonus points for you today, Haley. Take the rest of the day off. How's that?
Sounds great.
All right. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you guys next week. Take care.
Bye.